Hey guys, it's Brandon from Arabian Armory. I'm sorry I haven't uploaded in a while. Life got a little bit weird and I moved to a new apartment, but you know, I'm doing pretty good in life right now. So anyways, the video topic for today is what exactly is a longsword? What do you mean by it? The reason why I bring up this topic is because I see a lot of times in YouTube comment sections and Facebook groups, people talk about what is the best sword to bring in like a general sense. Like if you don't know the specifics of what circumstance you're going to be in, you just need to pick a weapon that's kind of good at everything. What do you pick? A lot of people pick longsword. Well, what does that mean? So in my hands, I have two different examples of what it could mean. So in the left, this is a war sword. On the right, this is a hand-and-a-half sword. Now, war sword is kind of used in historical documents. Hand-and-a-half sword is a very modern term. I would still kind of argue war sword is still kind of a more modern classification. The differences that you'll see, other than the aesthetic, because the left one, that's Holy Roman Empire Gothic style that you'll see in the museums. Beautiful aesthetic. I love late 15th century, early 16th century weapons and armor, versus this one, which is a little bit more 14th century in comparison. But the other differences are going to be in the way that they handle and in the length of these respective weapons. Now, both of these are short enough that I can fit them on my hip, comfortably walking around with it. It's not going to scrape on the floor, so I can wear them. That's what makes it a longsword and not a greatsword, among a couple other things. I've mentioned this in a video before. But if I have to pick one or the other, there's going to be some significant differences in why I would pick one or the other. The shorter one, I would definitely pick as a better option for indoors, because this is less likely for me to accidentally hit something like a wall or the ceiling if I need to defend myself, versus the longer one, bigger chance that I'll accidentally hit a wall or a ceiling, or at the very least that my enemy can use the environment as a shield in a way that this doesn't have to have that much of a problem. But it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. So in the one that I call the hand-and-a-half sword, I can actually effectively one-hand it. I can't really say the same about the one that I call a war sword. Not sure how well the camera can pick up the differences in speed. Now, I can still throw one strike, one-handed, with either of these weapons, but the difference is with the shorter, lighter one, I can effectively throw a combo. And even though it's a little bit slower than a properly one-handed weapon, the reach can compensate for that. For this one, the reach does not compensate. I will actually be slower to a point that it is a detriment. And really, I can only throw, like I was saying, one shot. And after that, I either got to get out of the way, or hopefully I have a shield. But then why am I using a shield for a sword this big? You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But the advantage of having this style, I'm going to show a little bit closer now, is you'll notice that the war sword has a bigger guard. It's not just longer, it's a little bit more stout. The bulbousness of the ends is more of an aesthetic thing. That's not really a requirement in the classification of a war sword, but what is a requirement in the classification of a war sword is that your guard has to be substantial enough that you can effectively block a greatsword. This, I mean, technically, you could still use this against a greatsword. You're going to have a really bad time. Your guard isn't long enough for certain shots that your opponent can use on you, so you'll have to try more, you'll have to move more to get the guard to protect you, versus this one, because it's roughly an inch longer on each side, this one's going to be a much better guard for you to use against a greatsword. But other things are blade presence in a bind. So the blades aren't super different in terms of length. The war sword blade length is only, what, 2 inches longer? But what you'll notice is very different in the blade profiles is that the war sword has a wider blade, and the fuller ends a little bit shorter than the fuller on the hand-and-a-half sword. So the war sword, because it has a wider blade, because the fuller is shorter, it has a lot more mass. The war sword can actually push back against a greatsword pretty well. If you try to push back against a greatsword with this hand-and-a-half sword, unless you're dramatically stronger than the person you're fighting, they have a serious advantage. If they have momentum against you, you just kind of have to accept that and like rotate yourself against it. That's not to say that this is going to be useless against a greatsword. Of course not. This is still a bar of hardened steel that you're swinging back at them. But the way that you'll have to fight with a hand-and-a-half sword against a greatsword is that you meet the opposing blade you slow down their momentum, but you cannot cancel it because of the mass difference in their blade versus yours, and you have to rotate yourself around. Versus the war sword, if for whatever reason, like because there's an aquarium next to me, or because there's this adorable, cat furniture here, if I can't maneuver sideways, if I have to stand my ground and just push back and shove, I can do that with this against the greatsword. Other differences are the handle length. The handle is just a teeny bit longer on the war sword than a hand-and-a-half sword. Hand-and-a-half, again, modern terminology. You can kind of grip it two-handed with like a half-hand space between the two hands, right? And you're gripping down by the pommel to accomplish that. Now, you get really good agility when you do that because you're increasing your leverage, right? And that is not the same as the war sword, which while you, obviously you still have the increased speed because of leverage, but with this you actually have a huge amount of power that you're able to generate. And the mechanics of the way that I would fight with this war sword, my upper hand, it's almost like I'm throwing a punch, right? So I'm like forcing that mass forward. I don't necessarily need to do that with the hand-and-a-half sword, right? I don't need to like force a punch when I two-hand the hand-and-a-half sword. I can kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of weird to explain, but if you ever handle the swords like these, you kind of get what I'm saying. This is more flowing, like water when I move my arm. This is more crashing, like a fucking tsunami when I move it. Now, when I say that, you guys are probably going to wonder, well, what the hell is the difference in the weight? Is the weight dramatically different? Surprisingly, yes and no, depending on what... If you're looking at raw number or you're looking at percentage. So, this one was, I believe, what was it, 4 pounds and 7-8 ounces? And this one is 2.75 pounds. So, what the hell is 3/4 of a pound? I'm sorry, American is really dumb. I really wish we went to metric, but anyways, you get the point. This is under 3 pounds. This is something like 4.5 pounds. So in terms of percentage, that's a drastic difference. That's why I'm telling you to handle differently. In terms of raw weight, pound per pound, ounce per ounce, it doesn't sound like a lot. But you will notice the differences. Another thing that I'm going to bring up is the point of balance on these respective blades. So on the war sword, the point of balance is right there, right? And so it's more than a full hand with my thumb sticking out on the side, just a tiny bit past that, away from the guard. And if you compare that to the hand-and-a-half sword, the point of balance is a bit closer. That's a lot closer, actually. This one, it's exactly 4 fingers apart from the guard, right? So I can't stick my thumb on the side and then some for this one. So the lower weight, the closer balance to the guard, that's why this one, I can comfortably one-hand it, and my wrist doesn't hate me, my elbow doesn't hate me. This one, I do the same kind of movement, my wrist is stressed. It's not going to break my own body doing it, but my body does not like the way that this feels. So yeah, what would I really pick if I didn't know the circumstances, if I had to just pick one weapon? Which version of the longsword would I pick? Which version would I recommend other people pick? In the modern world, I honestly say picking the smaller one makes more sense. Our modern world has more indoor circumstances that you will find yourself in than it ever did in history. We have skyscrapers. We have thousands of skyscrapers across the earth. So if you think about like the square footage of indoor space that exists in our world, that's why this would be the better choice. But if you asked me that question from the perspective of, say, the 1500s or the 1400s, I could still make a pretty solid case for the war sword. Mainly because when you go to the 14 and 1500s, you start having weapons that you don't see in the modern world, like pikes, or partisans, or various other polearms. This I can smack a polearm aimed at me right away, just move it. This is going to have a lot of trouble. But yeah, that's me answering the question, what do you mean by longsword? And I hope this has been informative. Thank you guys. And one last special announcement. I have been contacted. I've actually been working on this project. I am an actor, armorer, and choreographer for a PBS special called Honor Bound. It's going to be 9:30 p.m. for Milwaukee PBS. I'm going to be a knight in it. I have my Squire Jordan with me. And these are actually the swords we used on the show. This one is the one that I used. This one is the one that my friend Jordan used. And the reason why I had Jordan use the smaller one is because she's like 6 inches shorter than me. So proportionally, this made more sense for her, which is, I think, the final X factor in me determining what weapons you'd want to use. If you're a smaller person, don't try to overcompensate by having a giant sword. If you can't effectively wield a big sword, you're really hurting yourself in the end. Effectively use what is the best weapon for your body. So if this is what you are because you're below 5'6", then just use this. If you're closer to 6 feet, then use this. Anyways, thank you guys, and have a wonderful day.